Hey guys and girls, my name is Mike Heitzler. I appreciate you all coming tonight. You're all here for lots of different reasons. Maybe just to get out of the house, or maybe a free book. There you go.
And you ordered us here.
And some people I said you better show up, that kind of thing. But for some reason, as soon as I got here 53 years ago, I was 21 years old, I started teaching at Goose Creek High School, and I loved the place. There's Kathy right there. She was one of my students. She was mean as hell, but no, she wasn't. She was a doll, and she still is. But I just really like Goose Creek, and I'm still trying to figure out Goose Creek. Tonight is Goose Creek Ghosts and Ghouls. Do you know what a ghoul is? I had to Google it. Google the ghoul. A ghost would be like a spirit of something living. A ghoul is a spirit of something that is already just like a school teacher. Okay, or that too. So anyway, Goose Creek got ghosts, and we're going to go fast because I got about a 2-hour program that I'm going to try to get through in an hour and a half. But we got deep forests here, and some of you all have been there. If you get out of your cars and walk through this beautiful place, back here, I know one day the city's going to have a park. This is Button Hall Plantation House. They had their bathing. They had a bathing facility back there back in colonial period, and this is beautiful. And big water. They had a big lake back in here. This is going to all be developed again. Backyard in Boulder Bluff. I think that's Clarine, but you can see that 6-foot-high fence. It gives you some perspective, doesn't it? That is one big, huge tree. And there's only 2 others of those that I've found in there over in Woodland Lakes, across from 52, across on Woodland Lakes. There's 2 in there. And when I try to line them up with aerial, I found the avenue for Springfield Plantation. That was one of the trees that was along the avenue for Springfield Plantation. How many of y'all have heard of Springfield? Okay, don't lie. Don't lie. But it was a French Huguenots. The Maziques settled it there. Their slave quarters used to be right there where the school's parking lot is. So right in there. And there is an historic marker there. Chapel of Ease Historic Site has its own stories and spirits. And one of the Chapel of Ease tombs, we've been trying to repair them and get them back to be presentable. We hired the South Carolina Department of Archives and History to come down and do an archaeological search for Colonel George Chicken's burial spot. I had a feeling where it might be, but they didn't find it. They couldn't find it there. But I feel pretty sound that he is buried at the Chapel of Ease because it was his property that he donated, and it was part of his plantation. But he died down in Charleston, so he might be buried down in there somewhere. Private cemeteries, this is one at Yeamans Hall. Medway House, how many have seen Medway House? I didn't think, yeah, right, okay. How'd you get there, Mike? Oh, you knew Bob. Bob takes care of it. The oldest house in South Carolina is the Medway House, is right here in the Goose Creek area. And over the years, I guess I've been there maybe 10 or 12 times, doing research and interviewing the owner of the house and that sort of thing, but you just can't get in there. It's privately owned and nobody's allowed to get in. But it's the oldest house in South Carolina right here in Goose Creek. The old ancient church, and how many of y'all seen the St. James Goose Creek Church? Have you seen it, and have you been inside? Okay. I'm very tempted to organize a tour over there. We probably have to do with this many people at least 3 tours because they don't want more than 30 in a group. But we'll see what we can do. And then with evil characters, that's old the teacher in Charlesbury. I can't remember his name. There was a prankster. There was a slave that lived over there. He was always goofing around, and he got in trouble that night when the little girl was tied to the cemetery stone because he was coming home from visiting his girlfriend with one of these pumpkins and a light inside, and he heard the little girl. We'll talk more about that later. There's abandoned roads and bridges, and I don't know why that video, it's come together now and we can't get it produced properly, but that says abandoned roads and bridges. So Ghosts and Ghouls is what we're going to do, and Horrifying Goose Creek is the first chapter. Little Mistress Chicken is the second chapter. Old Bandithan is the third chapter. The Spectre of Mary Hearn, then Medway Spirits, then Mad Archie Campbell, then The Morbid Tale of Miss Coleman, and then The Somerville Light. You're going to find the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth about the Somerville Light. And I think if you went to high school anywhere around here, you've been out there, right? And was there alcohol involved? You know, you're in 11th grade, you got your girlfriend, you're out there with a couple beers. I know, that's what kids do. But and the Trillium Angel is the last one that we'll do, and that's, you'll probably like it the best. Horrifying Goose Creek. Well, we know it's horrifying because if you've been here the last couple of lectures, you've learned that Barbados was the most horrifying society in the English-speaking world, and that's where most of the people in Goose Creek originally came from. This is an old map of Barbados, and there's a close-up of one of it. It's not a very friendly place, and down there it's okay to shoot your slaves or cut off their foot if they're running away and that kind of thing. It had the most horrific slave code in the world. And in pursuit of fortunes, the seafarers from horrifying Barbados imported a repugnant slave-based society and used it to underpin a political party known as the Goose Creek Men. The nastiest group of people. I hate to say it, I love Goose Creek. They were the nastiest group of people. They're called the Goose Creek Men. The leader, James Moore, this was part of his plantation. When he died, he carved this part off for his daughter. But he was the leader of the Goose Creek Men. He took over all of South Carolina, took over a big hunk of North Carolina, a big hunk of Georgia, and then became the governor, and then his son followed in his footprints, and his assistant was George Chicken. He was the subject of our second lecture. Anglican commissary Gideon Johnson lamented, "The Goose Creek men, generally speaking, are the vilest race of men upon the earth, transporting themselves hither. They are the most factious and seditious people in the whole world." Now, I hear that on the news these days a little bit, that kind of talk. It used to not be that kind of talk, and I'm kind of surprised, but they're getting pretty rugged on the news. But this was the most vile talk that I saw back in my records. Reverend Francis LeJoe said the judge was examining evidence relating to accused witch. It doesn't belong to me to judge, but she had many friends here. It's a dismal sight to perceive how powerful the spirit of the devil, contrary to that of Christ, is here. And he was our minister at the St. James Goose Creek Church. And I believe every word that guy says or writes. I admire him very much. Maybe we'll have time to talk about him a little bit. He's my favorite Goose Creeker. Maybe the word should be Goose Cretan. Is that a word? He's my favorite Goose Cretan. Francis LeJoe, one of those traders, caused a poor Indian lady, a slave of his, to be scalped. There the poor woman lived 2 or 3 days in a miserable condition until she died alone in the woods. A proprietor wrote, "We find that one of our servants brought out of England is worth 2 of ye Barbadians, for they are so much addicted to rum that they will do little whilst the bottle is at their nose." So maybe that's the kind of people we need to come up here from Barbados. Half drunk, mean as heck, no rules, no self-control, get on a horse and go out there, kill me some Indians and put the others in slavery. Maybe that's what we need to get the place settled. I hate to think, but it seemed like the leaders were put together that way. The evil cadre known as the Goose Creek Men ruled Carolina for half a century, during which time they implanted a frightful culture with a rare genre of demonic tales that haunt the Goose Creek community to this day. And now we're going to start doing a little analysis, folks, because there ain't no tale of Goose Creek that's going to scare you. You know, maybe if you were an 8-year-old kid, you might go, hoo, or something. There's no tales out here that's you're going to be afraid of. But tonight, you're going to learn a whole bit about Goose Creek that you never thought about before. You're going to learn about the people here in Goose Creek that you've never broached a topic before by studying the ghost and ghoul stories. By studying the tales of horror, you're going to learn more about the Goose Creek people. That's our mission tonight. Now, back in the day, I don't remember when I had to read that book, but I had it in my library at home. It's called The Uses of Enchantment, The Meanings and Importance of Fairy Tales by Bruno Bettelheim from the University of Chicago. That's highfalutin, real highfalutin type stuff up there at University of Chicago. And maybe I was studying to be a psychiatrist. You know, when you're younger, you have all these weird ideas. And I read that book for the course, and I found out that this guy analyzed nursery rhymes. And by analyzing nursery rhymes, he said you can learn a whole lot of stuff, and it helps you analyze, it helps you work out the problems that the children might be having, if you're working with children and even with adults. But you can analyze nursery rhymes. Nursery rhymes is more than just a fun little story. It solves a problem too complicated for an adult and a child together to work out. Like this is one, for example, this is, who is that, Little Red Riding Hood? He said, and I'm taking his books like this and his stories and I'm pressing them all down to just a few comments. He said if Little Red Riding Hood, she was told that if she was in her grandma's bed and she looked over and next to her was not her grandma in bed with her, then she needs to scream and run, and the men will come from the countryside with the saw men would come and kill whoever that person was. That's the nursery rhyme that he interpreted. Ghosts and ghouls of every age broadcast an important message, assuage fears or explain historic complexities. These are real creepy. I'm just maybe do another two. One was, it was Cinderella. You had to put the little foot into a glass slipper, and the prince was going around trying to. He says that came from China, where they bind the feet of little girls because they were trying to cover for the emperor who liked little girls too much. Okay, and instead of criticizing him, they said that he just likes women that have tiny feet. And so binding the feet became a tradition in China that lasted for a long time. Now I'm trying to think of another one that he did about 15 nursery rhymes, and they were all creepy to me, reading them.
He was a pedophile.
The emperor was?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what I wanted to say, but there's a child here. Jeez, we're going to have to talk. Yeah, you're right. And I can't remember stuff. My doctor said this, welcome to the 70s, Mike. That you're in your 70s, you forget stuff. But, Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel, the little 5-year-old, little 7-year-old, two little German kids. Their mother dies. That's horrible. But then her father gets remarried, and they hate the woman, and she's not going to call her mama for nothing. And so they hate her, and so they run away, and they leave breadcrumbs so they can find their way back. But the birds eat the breadcrumbs, and now they're lost, and they get captured by a witch, and they outsmart the witch, and then their father comes and saves them and brings them home. That's Hansel and Gretel. And there's some lesson there that kind of eludes me, but that's one of his lessons. And the Ghosts of Watery Jack and Edward Beard. Those are two interesting. I hope we'll have time to get to them tonight. That's part of my program. And you'll find out things about, you never heard of Watery Jack before until you started coming to these. He was an incredibly important man during the Yamasee Wars in the early 1700s, and then Blackbeard the pirate was born and reared here in Goose Creek, and we have a lot of information about him now. Edward Beard, also known as Blackbeard, was born in Goose Creek and harassed the sea lanes. Watery Jack was, one of the governors said, Watery Jack was the author of most of ye mischief. George Chicken may have killed him. You don't know that for sure. Stede Bonnet, trouble in his mind. George Chicken hung him down in Charleston. He was a very wealthy man. He was a very wealthy man down in Barbados, and when it was time to retire, he left. He left his home, he left his plantation, and he got a ship and went out and started harassing the sea lanes. You kind of wonder why somebody would do that. Don't say anything. But we can talk about that some other time. Little Mistress Chicken, we're going to go ahead and go and tell her story now. And I know I'm going fast, but these are not complicated, and you guys can get it. I'm going to go fast. I'm going to go through Little Miss Chicken now, a veritable happening of Carolina. My mama gave me this book 50-something years ago when I was teaching at Goose Creek High School. I went home to St. Louis for a Christmas vacation, and she gave me this book, and she said, Mike, your dad and I found this in one of these boxes, because they were going around and doing antiquing. And she says, I think this has something to do with where you live. So I said, okay, thanks, Mom. I took it and didn't read it for about 40 years. You know how it is. You go, what is this thing? I'm going to throw it away. Maybe I'll read it. And that is the beginning of the Chicken Trilogy. That's one of the 3 books that's in the Chicken Trilogy. Little Mistress Chicken. She lived in Charlesbury, and this map shows you the renderings of Charlesbury. There was a little chapel there called Strawberry Chapel, and they had a ferry boat, and there's the chapel. It was the rice fields. They had all the land laid out and cut and platted out for a church, for a school, for all kinds of different things, mostly homes. And they even had a rice mill, which was one of the biggest and most modern mills in Carolina at the time. And this was the remnants of the landing. This is where I did a lot of my scuba diving, right off this old place. Probably 50 years ago, we went scuba diving, and then my wetsuit started shrinking on me over the years. Did I show you all pictures of some of the artifacts?
Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't remember. I can't remember stuff. The ferry, this is where the ferry was too. This, on the back of this photograph, it's written, "Going to church on Sunday," is written on the back. So you can see the ladies are all dressed up with their bonnets going across on the ferry. And thank you, John, one of my students from Goose Creek High School. We had a lecture like this a few years ago, and I said, I have never been able to find the ferry boat landing. And he said, Mr. Heisler, you meet me, and I'll take you out there and I'll show you, because I've just found it. This is the remnants of the abandoned ferry boat landing here and on the other side of the western branch of the Cooper River. His name is John Sarcopoli. You remember that name? Okay, he lives over here in Boulder Bluff. And he went out, we had a great time, and he took me right to the ferry boat landings that I had been looking for half a century. Little Mistress Chicken, she's a little cutie pie. This is a horrible rendering of her being tied to a tombstone. She wandered away from school, and if you don't watch those kids, they'll wander away. She had a little pet turtle, and she would play with him and walk around town, and the schoolmaster, Master Dupree, he was infuriated to find out that she wandered off, and he went looking for her. And when he found her, he tied her to a tombstone for punishment. That's a really creepy punishment, but not only is that creepy, but he forgot about her. And that evening, even one of the servants there at the house asked if this was the mother, not the mother, but the wife of the teacher, asked if they had seen the little girl, and she was too busy doing something, reading or whatever, and didn't have time to solve the problem. However, this man was coming home from visiting his girlfriend, and he was a prankster and having fun with a pumpkin and the lights and trying to scare people when he heard cries coming from Strawberry Chapel, where the little girl was tied to the tombstone. And so he rescued her. And the town was infuriated, and the word went out to find this school teacher that tied this little girl up and left her there during the night. And they went out looking for him and found him. And one of these in the book, this guy right here, he's saying, give me the whip, massa. Give me the whip, massa, because he wanted to take the whip and beat the guy too. And later, the teacher was run out of town backwards on a horse and kicked and run out of town like that. And later, he was found dead in a well about a year later. Okay, so some say that they hear cries at night. So they turn this is a true story. This is a veritable happening, and it is true. When I went back and researched the bits and pieces of it, after having it, my mom gave it to me, and I didn't know if it was true or not, but it says a veritable happening. I started researching it, and all the pieces started coming together. I thought, my gosh, this is really a true story. And they say that, but it's not true that her spirit is in this cemetery, because she didn't die. And her spirit's not there, but people swear that they hear cries coming out of the cemetery at night. And the people that own the Strawberry Cemetery don't want anybody in there at night. They have a very secure fence around it now with barbed wire, and they don't want anybody talking about ghosts, because there aren't any ghosts there. And I went around, I snuck in there over the barbed wire. No, whatever I say stays in this room, okay? Stays in the room. And I tried to find a tomb that looked like the one that's in the book that she was tied to, and I couldn't find one. That's the closest that I could find. And this is, she grew up and died at, I think, at the age of 54 or so, which was really old back then. And this is Little Mistress Chicken. So she did not die, and her spirit is not haunting the graveyard. But if you're interested, the Chicken Trilogy has 3 books in it. The first book is about George Chicken Sr., Carolina Man of the Ages. The second book is about his son, George Chicken, son of Carolina. And this is the little girl, Little Mistress Chicken. That was the granddaughter and the daughter of those 2 men. So you can see how the story all pulls together. Ghouls and Old Bandison. This is one of my really coolest stories. It's not scary to any of us, but it really makes a lot of sense. A private enterprise bought land at the Naval Weapons Station out there, and they bought slaves and put the slaves out there on that. And then their company went south or broke up for some reason, and they left the slaves there. I think there was 26 slaves. They were left there for 12 years just to take care of themselves. Well, it was great. They were able to raise their own food and have their own livestock, and they were right on the water, right across from Yeamen's Hall. And it was really a good opportunity for these slaves that were brought here against their will from Africa. And they happened to luck out temporarily. But the African Americans lived independently for 12 years. runaway slaves sought refuge there, and they would have nothing to do with that. If you were a runaway slave, don't come to where we live. We want people to ignore us. Let us live our life here. Let us raise our livestock, have a garden, raise our children, do our own thing here. There's 26 or 30 of them. And if you sneak away from your masa, don't think we're going to let you come here, because we're not going to do it. And they started scaring anybody that would come and try to sneak in. They would scare them by making noises all night long and bringing torches. That's what those ghouls are all about, into the woods around them so that they would run away and never want to come back and sleep there again. Alexander Vanderdussen purchased the old plantation after about a dozen years, and he was terrible. Local slaves said, if you go there, old Bandison will catch you. Vanderdussen, he erected a fine house, a brick dairy, and planted a row of mulberry trees for the production of silk, but he was a severe master, and his reputation spread by the neighboring blacks, who contend that old Vanderdussen did revisit the glimpse of the moon, making night hideous. And this is Vanderdussen's plantation. This thing doesn't work, does it? Vanderdussen's plantation's right here. And this is the gooseneck turn in here where Yeamans Hall sits right here. This is the Cooper River, so it's a very nice location. But Vanderdussen was nuts. He was not stable in his mind. He was found to be disordered in his mind, and he was taken out of his plantation and sent back to England, to London, where they said for the last 3 years of his life, he just rode around London in his carriage. And when I read that again, I thought, well, I just kind of ride my bike around town now, you know, kind of like old man Vanderdussen. You all see me riding my bike around town? Yeah, I got nothing to do. I'm like this old guy. But they said that he was disordered in his mind. And by 1756, trustees were named to manage his estate, and he died in London 3 years later. Again, the families lived isolated and unsupervised, and as far as I can tell, there's some wonderful stories. I don't have time tonight. If we get out of here early, maybe I can tell you at the end. The wonderful stories about him and the family that came in and bought the plantation and came in later. They really had a wonderful relationship. A madman and the cruelest slave laws in British Empire, a powerful statement about slavery in South Carolina. Alexander Vanderdussen in South Carolina, had the most severe slave laws in the world. And they had a crazy master. So that's why they created these ghouls, so that nobody would come and try to sneak away and stay in their isolation. They didn't want to be bothered. They wanted everybody to stay away from them and let them live their life. Yeamans Hall. The ghost of Old Goose Creek, Yeamans Hall. The Yeamans Hall plantation house was originally built as a defense against the Indians. It was built with extra sturdy shutters for the windows and extra double doors so nobody could get in there. They had secret doors in the floor under the carpet so you can get down underneath the floor. They had a well in the basement, so you would have water. If the Indians attacked, you'd have a supply of water. They even had a tunnel that they dug from the house out to the river where they had a boat, a rowboat covered up and hidden out there. So if they got attacked, they could get away. And one boy, they thought it was haunted because one of the little slave boys, his name was Paul, he started hiding out in all the little secret places, and he would be gone for days. And they thought, well, maybe the Indians carried him off. But he played that game again and again and again until somebody gave him a good spanking. But this is the entrance gate, and this is Yeamans Hall Cemetery, and this is Paul's Hole. That's where I was trying to get to that up there. And one time, for 3 weeks, the house mistress feared the young boy drowned or was kidnapped. From that time on, it was called Paul's Hole. And that's the clubhouse there, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this clubhouse in just a minute. Landgrave Thomas Smith was the owner of Yeamans Hall at the time. It was a beautiful plantation right at the gooseneck turn of the creek. And this next story is a very important story that's going to change your whole mind about South Carolina history and maybe even history of the nation. The story of Mary Hearn. I feel like I'm already running out of time. How am I doing? I've been doing it almost 30 minutes, and we got a long way to go. A lady came over from Ireland to be a teacher, and she looked and she found that at Yeamans Hall they had 4 little girls, and she went out to Yeamans Hall to teach, and she was an excellent teacher. and a beautiful young lady. And it was a custom for those days for families of means to hire private teachers. Her name was Mrs. Lantham. Upon arrival, Mrs. Henry Smith, because her husband had died, and her small daughters settled the new governess into the second floor alone in the room overlooking the marsh and the creek. However, the next day, it was Sunday. The whole family was in the parlor having Christian service for the Sunday. They couldn't get to the church. It was about 6 miles away, no, probably 8 miles away. And they'd have to go by water, or they'd have to cross the creek and then have horses somehow there. So they couldn't get there. They're having service as they usually did right there in their parlor. When the teacher, who was upstairs reading and goofing off, she came screaming down the stairs at the top of her lungs saying, "Who is it? There's somebody up there trying to get me." And when they finally got her calmed down, she said she was just reading in her book when this old lady came in and glared at her and lunged at her. And when she fell back and came back again, the lady was gone, and she turned around, and there she was again, coming at her again, lunging at her, trying to get her. And she kept escaping until she ran downstairs and said, "Who's up there? Who was up there?" Mrs. Lantham was puzzled but politely invited the lady in. I'm sorry, I skipped that. And my mother, Mary Hearn, spent the last years of her life in these rooms. The next Sunday, she was down in the parlor with the family. They finally calmed her down, and the girls would stay upstairs with her so she wouldn't have to be alone. She said, okay. She was having church in the parlor the following Sunday when a man came in, and she started screaming again. She said, you're her, you look just like her. And he calmed her down, and he said, that's my mother you're talking about. People always told me I looked exactly like my mother. She must be very upset. Her spirit must be very upset. She spent the last years of her life upstairs with those 4 girls, reading and talking and playing and enjoying. And here you come. What are you doing? She says, I'm not doing anything. I'm just reading. I'm sitting up there and I'm reading. And he said, what are you reading? He said, well, she was reading a book called The Turkish Spy. The Turkish Spy. Now, this is the way history is. When I first wrote this first book and published it in 1983, there was no Google. I just copied the stories down and put them in the book, and I had a chapter called Goose Creek Ghost Stories, Ghosts and Legends was the name. Goose Creek Ghosts and Legends. And it's in there, and you'll see it in the old book. But I didn't have any way of analyzing anything, and I really didn't know, like I found out reading Bettelheim, that if you analyze these nursery rhymes or these stories, you can get an important lesson out of them. And I hadn't ever done that before. But I picked the book up again about 40 years later, and I looked in it and it said this Turkish Spy was the name of the book that she was reading. I never thought it meant anything. It didn't mean anything to me. Why would you care what the name of the book was? But I Googled it. And Turkish Spy was a series of books where this Turkish guy was the hero in all these stories coming out of Europe, the Age of Reason, and he was a deist. A deist. Do you know what a deist is? Well, we should all know what deists are. I'm going to tell you what it is, and then I'm going to tell you why we should have already known this. Somebody's been keeping secrets from us. But a deist, like Thomas Jefferson was a deist. No, I don't. Well, maybe he was. I'm not going to get into an argument with you here. Maybe he was, but Benjamin Franklin. I did? Oh, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was a deist. Bob, who was another deist? John Adams was a deist. The leaders of our country were deists at that time. Well, a deist was a religion of nature. They believed there was no God Almighty up there keeping an eye on you. Nobody's up there listening to what you say or knowing what you think. There's nobody to pray to. They're simply part of nature. And if you want to know about your God, then study nature. And the more you know about nature, the more you know about God. But don't worry about there's no such thing as Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and all that business. That doesn't make any sense. Forget it. That's what the Turkish Spy brought that in. He was a deist. And the old lady was scared to death that teacher was going to let those children learn to be deists and not learn to be true, here they are, true, I had them on the next page, true Christians. Washington's up there. There you go, Mike, I'm sorry. Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, and Paine. Thomas Paine, the leaders, the brainiacs of our nation, the leaders, were the ones that were the deists, and trying to bring deism in from Europe was going through the age of reason. And you remember he wrote the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature, and nature's God, entitles them. What in the world is this nature's God nonsense? Okay? But that was the movement of the time. The religion of nature was rational theology that emerged in the 17th and 18th century. Deists insisted that religious truth should be subject to the authority of human reason rather than divine revelation. Consequently, they denied that the Bible was the revealed Word of God and rejected Scripture as a source of religious doctrine. Mary Hearn died in 1777. She's the old lady who's doing the haunting, Mary Hearn, 1 year after the Declaration of Independence. She read that Declaration of Independence and she knew how horrifying that document was to her, her family, her grandchildren, and her nation. How horrifying it was, but it wasn't recognized, and she was trying to make sure that her children were not given that horrible information. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve, that's nature's God. What about the Bible? What about Jesus? Never mind. We're just talking about nature's God. And then the next one is, all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? That doesn't fit into Goose Creek. Remember, we had the royalty that owned the land? Ain't nobody equal to them. And are you going to have to mean you're going to be free, you're going to be liberated? You're going to be, they're going to have to free their slaves now if this thing catches on? So it panicked that household. How come we never heard about that? Because it was a dangerous movement at the time, and it was the people that were really the leaders of our country were deists at that time. Why didn't it sink in and spread? That's your homework. You guys figure that out. Wow. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast, too slow? Am I making sense? Making sense. Okay. Okay, Medway Plantation, you can't get out there, but it's the coolest place. One guy wrote a book called The Treasure of Pierre Gaillard, the guy John Bennett, and it was about Medway Plantation, and he said that it had a lot of ghosts at Medway. There was something ghostly and strange about the whole demesne, and I'm sorry that it's over on the side again like that. It just happens and I can't fix it. But I've been out there probably a dozen times, maybe 15 times over the years, and I've been blessed. I've interviewed the Mrs. Gertrude Lejeune, who was the owner of the house I interviewed her when she was walking, I interviewed her when she was in a wheelchair, and I interviewed her just about 30 days before she finally died at the age of about 102 or so. She lived a long time, and she was just a delightful lady, very, very pleasant, very, very rich, and if you all want to read something interesting, then read about her. There's some books out on her. Witnesses attest that the Dutchman returned to the upstairs floor to assess his dominance. The Dutchman bought and built the original home. And they say he still sits in that upper room in a rocking chair smoking a cigar. And sometimes you can catch him up there. The high Dutch gables induced evil spirits to walk down and leave the home in peace. You see those the stair steps, and there's just some pictures of the inside. I've never been inside the home. I've only been in their hunting lodge and on the grounds.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah, Mike. And Mike's been out there because you know the guy that's to see Rachel. Did you go with me out there that one day? Yeah, it's worth the trip, isn't it? Yeah. And that's some of the inside and some of the outside. There's a grieving widow. In 1686, the plantation is said to be haunted by a grieving young bride whose husband went deer hunting and got killed and shot as a mistaken animal. And she has never gotten over the angst and the horrible depression from the loss of her husband. And they say that the woman waits in the north window for her husband to return from a hunt. And that the north window, which is that one right here. So every time I go out there, I walk around and I look up those windows, look up there to see if I can see her, because she's supposed to be up there looking out for her husband all the time. And it was really strange, because when I looked up there, it wasn't glass. This is antique glass, old glass, and it's very distorted. It's not like you can't even look through that. It would just be a distortion. And this is one image that I took, and it didn't mean anything to me, but that's what it looked like from my projection camera that I had at the time. And then about 20 years later, by mistake, I turned it upside down. Isn't that creepy? That's really creepy. I turned it upside down and it looks like a woman in there.
Yeah, it does. That's pretty neat.
That is kind of neat. But there's the house. Samuel, Marion, and Polly Seed promised each other to return after their demise to the upper room. And they said that the man died first and Polly would go up there and wait for him, but he never showed up. Typical man. There's the Medway, the walks, the little stepping stones going up and coming down.
Where is that? Is that between here and Scorner?
It is, yes, but if you go down Montague Plantation Avenue, you know where that is? Do you know where Henry Rhett Boulevard is? I mean, Rhett turns into Henry Brown turns into Montague. When you're on Montague, if you look north, all those woods, that's it. That's Medway. Yes, ma'am.
If you go up the next block, I think it's Holly Hill or something, there's a housing development there, and there's a dirt road. If you go all the way to the end of where the housing is, there's a dirt road that takes you right to Medway. And you can go right down it. That's how they get in and out of it. Right when you get to the gate, there's a gatekeeper's house there. I've been back there a couple of times.
But there, before you get there, they have a sign, no trespassing.
Right, but I was there,
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I was taking something to get.
Because who was with me just maybe a month ago, you want to?
People at the gate one time, and the other time I went to the other place.
I took some, oh, Judy, you were with me. No? Yeah, you were with me, and there was a sign that said no trespassing at the gate. So, I mean, not the gate, but at the dirt road. We turned around and had to go back out because we were taking a look at that.
I was there to take something to the people, so I was supposed to.
Yes, ma'am, yeah. Well, that's Bob Hortman. He's a caretaker. And there's their back porch. At one time, you see it has two cannons back there? It's a whole lot better condition now than then. Thomas Smith was buried. That's the graveyard. That's the hunting lodge. That's where I had the opportunity to interview Gertrude Lejeune. She was a spy in World War II, and she was taken prisoner. And there she is with her husband, Sidney. Sidney died probably at the age of about 30, and she was a widow the rest of her life. Medway, a Greek shipping tycoon now with a taste for bird hunting and fine art, is the new owner of Medway, a company controlled by Gregory blah, 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 and his family paid $11 million for Medway Plantation. Now this is a story coming up that's really, really weird, and I'm going to try to make it brief because you could take 30 minutes to tell it, but I'm going to push it together and try to be brief. Mad Archie Campbell, and it has a very important lesson in it, and I want to see who knows what the lesson is by the time I get done telling the story. Mad Archie Campbell was the British officers, when they finally took over Charleston, the British officers would come up into the Goose Creek area. They would attend services at the old church, and it was a social place that was safe for them. But Charleston had fallen to the British, and the British were being entertained in many of the homes down in Charleston. You know, they were royalty. They were royalty, and they, I would say a whole lot of them, maybe most of them, did not want to break away from England. They were happy being the royalists. But they were having a party down there, and Mad Archie Campbell started bragging about how he was attracted to this beautiful young lady, and that he was going to get to know her, and his buddies started teasing him and pushing him around a little bit. He said, listen, I bet my filly against your 50 shillings that within 3 days I will be married to that girl. And everybody started laughing. But he was serious. And the next day he went and rented a little carriage, went by, picked her up and went on a little carriage ride around town, just having a wonderful time, being a perfect gentleman. And then he started going a little faster, and they came out of town. Up there where the Navy base used to be, up in that area was a big park. He went through there for a little while and kept coming farther. He stopped at the 10-mile house and got water for the horse. Then he stopped at the next one was the 14-mile, right where the old mall used to be. He got water there, got off, and then he started going faster and faster until it got into a gallop. He crossed over the Goose Creek Bridge. He went up to the parson's house, which is very near the church, knocked on the door and called them out and said, I want you to marry me to this young lady. And the parson says, well, I won't, because he could tell she was very, very upset. He said, I will not without her consent. And so Mad Archie Campbell drew out his pistol and put his pistol to the guy's forehead, to the pastor, and said, you will marry us now, or I'll shoot your brains out. And then she's going to really have a bad reputation, because we're going to be together anyway, and she's going to be with me without being married, and that's going to be a horrible reputation. So marry us now. And he did. He married him. And then they got into the carriage afterwards, and they started very nicely going back to town. And he went all the way back to town, and they ended up living at Exeter, which is a plantation between here and Monk's Corner. And they ended up having a little baby girl, and they ended up being incredibly happy together. And he ended up involved in a Berkeley County battle where he was taken prisoner. He was the only redcoat taken prisoner by the Patriots here in Berkeley County at that time. But he got up and tried to sneak away and started running, got shot in the back and killed.
Wasn't that a part of
That was funny. I was trying to think of something.
the country club and golf course?
Yeah, the Exeter is, yeah, up there. You're right, where the country club and golf course is. But she said that she was so heartbroken. And she said that she fell in love with him in the carriage on the way back to town after the forced marriage. She said she realized, she just thought he was a big mouth soldier, but coming back in the carriage, she realized what a wonderful man he was. None of this makes any sense, does it? But what is the lesson there? And they got married, but when she died, she became the evil spirit, or the spirit at the church, and she haunts the church every night. You can hear her crying and calling out Archie's name. So what's the story behind this? What's the reason that we have this ancient tale that's been on the books for about 300 years? I think it's a description of the Revolutionary War. You have immense emotion. You have immense hate, immense love. You have violence, you have tenderness, you have expense, you have waste. You have all these emotions spinning around. That's exactly a good description. What happened with Mad Archie Campbell and Pauline and their little 7-year-old girl is a good example of what was happening in South Carolina and Charleston during the Revolutionary War. All those emotions were spinning together. So if you want to know about the Revolutionary War in Berkeley County, you can talk about 3 or 4 battles that took place, or you could tell that one story and integrate all the emotions that were in people's lives every day in Berkeley County during the Revolutionary War. There's Exeter right there. That make any sense, Judy? A little bit? She wasn't shaking her head much, so. Vidal Bridge is where he got shot, in the back. Archie, that's right. Paulina and Archie. When the night falls sadly, some say they can hear the stealthy rustling of the spirits of Paulina and Archie in the thick forest surrounding the sanctuary. This one here is even creepier than that. This is a morbid tale. This guy was visiting some friends at the Oaks, staying there for a week or two, and wandered off. He was just in boredom, went down and found this church, which was a little bit different back then than it is today as far as the way it's laid out. But he went into the church just to sit and kind of collect his thoughts and have some time alone. And as you would know, the church never had anybody there, but that day there was a beautiful woman sitting in there. And wouldn't you know it, they started talking, they started getting to know each other, and they started loving each other. And the morbid tale of Miss Coleman, there is a book printed in New York City that I found in the South Carolina archives. I used to have, before they had computers, talking about a nerd, I would drive on Saturday up to the archives in Columbia to do the research. Now an 8-year-old boy can do it on his computer within about 20 minutes. It would take me all day to get it, But I found this book. There's only 150 copies were printed. It was called The Goose Creek Church, A Morbid Tale. It was published in 1901, but the author's name appears on the work, but no author's name appears on the work, and it was printed at, quote, Sign of the Eagle, 1901. It had 22 pages. I just wanted to tell you what that book was all about and where I got that book. But Charles Carrington was resting down at the church when he met this young lady, and they began to meet there day after day for about a week to 10 days until he told her that he wanted to marry her. And she said, you're not serious. You really don't want to marry me. You don't know what marriage is all about. You don't know how severe it is. And why marry me? He said, because I love you. I know I love you, and you're beautiful. And she said, beauty is only skin deep. Anyway, he followed her out, and she said there, would our love outlive the fires of youth when the finger of time placed its seal of age and decay? No, 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 1,000 times no. Man's love droops, then fades until it dies. This is where she was buried. And he didn't know that she was already dead, and he was only dealing with a spirit. This is what the book explains. And he followed her back. She said, follow me. And he followed her back to this crypt where she went inside, and he passed out at the door. The door closed behind her, and he was trying to pull this metal door open, and he passed out there and was discovered by the people that lived at the Oaks. They finally found out, where is he? And they came and they found him, and they said, well, yes, this is, and they found inside there the body of this lady and decomposing. This is really a creepy story, isn't it? She was in there decomposing, and her casket was open. So this was premature burial. And this, I don't tell anybody, but I stood on top of the grave and took a picture of her crypt. And there is where the door was. And that has a stone on it with the inscription. And there's a aerial, just to kind of give you an idea, straight across from the front door of the church. But she said, follow me, and he followed her until she got to the door. And then, now the whole story here is she died and she was died and buried prematurely. And there was an incredible fear back in those days that you would be buried prematurely because there was a horrible disease going around called malaria. And mal and area, two Latin words, it means bad air. It was caused, they thought it was caused by the miasma, which was another word they made up, coming out of the pluff mud in the rice fields. They thought this air was coming up, and if you breathed that, you would get sick called malaria, and it would put you in a coma. And sometimes you were in a coma for a week or 2 weeks. John Rutledge, who was our governor, he was our first governor for South Carolina, he told his family that when he dies, he wanted them to decapitate him before he was buried, because there was a common fear of being buried alive. This seems to happen more often than we would think. And this is just a story, a tale to be told, to beware of the disease that they called malaria and be aware of being buried alive, because she had scratched her way out of the coffin. Now, isn't that a creepy story?
When was that bricked up?
I don't know. It's always been bricked up, Mike, as far as I can tell.
Do you know anything about the Naval Weapons Station?
The Naval Weapons Station, what about it?
Because on the 16th hole, there's something like that on there.
Let me think about that, because I did write about that and researched it. Let me think about it.
They rebuilt it not that long ago, a couple of years.
Now, Charles Carrington never told of his meetings with Edith nor offered explanation for his mysterious accident. He left the plantation of his host, returned to his home, and never visited the old church again. But that was just really a tale to be told to make sure that people were aware of the frequency of premature burials back then.
That's where wake came from.
The wake? Yeah, oh yeah. The wake, yeah. You got it. People stand around and wait for you to wake up. And this is a really great picture of the key keeper. He was a little boy that was always getting in trouble, but he was in charge of the key to get the church open and closed. And I'm digressing now, but it reminds me of my first year I was teaching at Goose Creek High School. This little guy, he came to me, I was teaching history. He was in 8th grade, and I was teaching 8th grade South Carolina history. He said, Mr. Heisler, he said, I want to show you an old church. And I did, oh, yeah, really. And he kept coming to me, let me show you an old church, that's where I live. And I said, okay. So after school one day, he was standing by my car, and he went and got him in my car. Now, you don't do that today. Teachers don't let kids get in their car today. But he jumped in the car. He told me where to go. Turn here, turn there, Mr. Heisler, turn down there, turn over there. There we go. There's the church. And he brought me to that church. And he was a little boy, looked like him. That's not him, but it looked like him. And every time I see him, I think of him. His name was Richard Simmons. And his little brother, Robert Simmons, is the ones that give the tours there to this day. And that's something. Now, I'd go back 50 years. I really digressed, didn't I? Anyway, that's what's on the stone on top of the crypt. And the Somerville Light, who wants to hear about that? I heard about the Somerville Light all the time after I came to South Carolina and after I moved in here to Goose Creek. I hear all the time about the Somerville Light. And every time that somebody told me about it, I was teasing a little earlier, but it always had something to do with a girl or two in the car and something to do with a beer or two or a six-pack here and there. They go out looking for the light out in the woods. Well, I started interviewing people, and I found a lady that she was the granddaughter of the man who was the engineer on the train that had the accident. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But the Somerville Light started as a logging entrance dominated. They had lumber mills in Somerville, and with the big saws. So they would have nothing but a whole bunch of trees growing where Cane Bay is today, and where Corns Crossroads is today, and where College Park is today, and where Nexton is today. That's nothing but trees. So they laid railroad ties, a railroad track out there, and went out there with their men to cut the trees down, haul the trees back to Somerville, cut the lumber up. And I hope that...
That was a small train, right? The little...
I think so too. I think so too. I don't know if I have a photo of that here, but I might have taken it out to make it short enough. But I can't see that very well. But you can see the Corns Crossroads is right here. And they would come out of Somerville with this railroad track. They built the track coming out of Somerville. Okay? And you can see where the track crosses the state road. This is the state road, Highway 176, right there. Oh, here it is. It's bigger. I couldn't see it. Oh. Anyway, it comes out of Somerville, and right above Corns Crossroads is where the railroad track would cross the road. Here is, it's not there anymore, but there's the barracks that the men would stay in. You wouldn't go out there every day and come back home. You go out there and stay all week, and then maybe on a Saturday or Friday evening, you'd go back home for the weekend, then come back out to the little quarter house, you call it, or barracks. And Judy, you went out there with me too. We went out there twice, didn't we? And they tore it down maybe a year ago. Yeah. Uh-huh. And when they got done with the lumber and they got all the lumber cut out of here, they laid out all of these plats for oil. And they had the myth, because they never have discovered much oil out there at all, but they had a myth that there was an abundance of oil, and you could buy a piece of property and put a oil mill, an oil pump on it. Now, that might sound kind of silly, but there was a major oil well in Somerville at the time called the Maybelliner oil well, and there's a whole story there where that had to do with Maybelline Lodge and Maybelline Cosmetics and all of that, but we don't have time tonight to get into it. But and also right here, we were talking about Liberty Hall Road. Somebody was mentioning Montague Plantation Road and all that. The people that owned that, I met when they were at Fort Smith, and they were here. They said they bought a whole package full of pots and pans, and somebody threw a spatula in there, and it was Liberty Hall. That was the land there. And they platted out places for derricks to be in there. They were going to pump for oil right here in Goose Creek. That's before they decided to sell it, and they went ahead and developed it into Liberty Hall and Brick Hope. But departing Pretty Man's office in the lumber yard at 5 in the morning on January 17th, 1928, engineer Willie Dangerfield with John Henry Lamb and assistant Lawrence Smith pierced the winter darkness and lifting blanket of fog with their train engine pulling empty rail cars en route to a siding at the timber work site north of the state road. William Willie Benjamin Dangerfield. And this is a quotation from his granddaughter who taped her interview with him before he died. So that's where I got the information from. Well, it was foggy that morning, and we left to go out there. 4 or 5 o'clock, we had to be out there. It was foggy, and you couldn't see tall. He said to me, Willie, don't want you to go out there until it gets light enough to see, because there's another engine coming in. I could see down the road a half a mile or better, then departing but 4 miles and lingering smoke with a forest and brush fire that day before obscured vision in all directions. I'm trying to read exactly as he wrote it, how he stated it. Suddenly, at 10 after 7, their engine violently collided with a string of empty rail cars, knocking the engineer to the floor and killing the other 2 workers. I never had time to say, look out, or not a thing. I played that tape over and over and over and over again to get the words in proper order. And the train hit him and tore a hole in his head, tore his brains out. And my brother-in-law, it took him right in the middle of the track and carried him up 90 feet up the hill. He died between the crossroads and Mr. Bunch carrying him to the doctor. He died on the road to the hospital. So from his description, the accident took place about I'd say half a mile past the intersection where he says, I'm going to read it in a minute, the rail line crosses over the state road, and that's where he got hit, right here or right here. I think it's right here. The track hit this road. Corns Crossroads, the railroad track. This is where they had the barracks that we were looking at right in here. The lumber railroad car coming down here and crosses the state road here, has the accident here or has the accident there. I haven't been able to figure that out. Willie Dangerfield said, yes, sir, his head laying right to the track. It ran through his head, cut one ear on a portion of his head, carried it a little piece up the road, but his body was laying right towards the track. His head was up towards the track. That's what I was able to get off the tape-recorded quotes. Killed by a log train, 37-year-old Lawrence Smith, male, Negro, married, was killed by a log train on Thursday, January the 16th, 1928. The family man died instantly and is interred at Long Ridge Cemetery. And I've been to his gravesite. You can find it and took a photograph of it. Long Ridge Cemetery is the cemetery right near the Wassamasaw Church. Not the one you see at the church, but it's about a half a mile away. John Henry Lamb lies at New Hope Methodist Church Cemetery. This is a quotation from the newspaper. The locomotive spotlight piercing the morning smoke and fog on that fateful day, combined with the tragic decapitation, is the origin of the Somerville Light myth that attracts courageous motorists to Light Road at night in search of the light and missing head. The railroad is gone, and today is traced by a power line right away. The Somerville Light on Sheep Island Road is believed to be the ghost of the woman who lived there over 100 years ago. Legend has it that she met her husband at the train after work every night with a lantern to guide them home. He was killed in the logging accident, and apparently, these many years later, the woman's ghost still seeks him. Sheep Island Road, that's what it looks like today. And the Somerville Light, the light is in the greenish glow, some say, basketball size, and hovers over the road. This is where they say they see the light. Sheep Island Road, here it is. Here's the railroad. Here's the railroad this way, right here. And here's Sheep Island Road that goes from the state road, goes all the way into Somerville. Sheep Island, right there is where the two come together. Right there is where I think probably where the lady stood with her lantern. And I took the photograph here. You'll say, why in the world did Heisler take this photograph? You see that road sign? It said Light Road on it. And the next day I came back and it was gone. And so I went into this right next to it is where they have this site. I went in there to ask them about it, and the little lady at the desk, she didn't know anything about anything, but she said, well, people steal that sign all the time, sir. So I said, okay, they stole the sign before, and they have the road blocked, so you can't get very far in there. And this is the Essie, who is the granddaughter of the engineer. She's dead now. This is probably about 10 years ago. She's dead now, and this is her son and his wife. Good spirits. This is anybody want to ask any questions about the Somerville Light? Does that make sense to you, what I just said? Have you ever heard that much information about it? Got it from that lady interviewing her. And is that an hour and a half now?
That's only an hour.
That's an hour. Oh my gosh. What are all you people doing here?
Listening to you.
I'm going to sit down just for a minute. Okay. Boy, that feels good. This is the well behind the Oaks, and I'm so sorry the Oaks is completely torn down now, and even the gate's been torn away, and they're selling the pieces of the gate and the fence and the eagles that are over the gate, and it's very, very sad. And this is gone also, but a friend of mine is standing there looking down in the well. That was the well for the Oaks ever since the colonial period. So it's been there for many, many years. And she told me, this is her, Latta. Anybody here know Lois? Her husband died maybe 5 years ago, but she told me that she never saw an evil spirit down in that well, that there were always good spirits. So it has a lot to do with your attitude, I think, too. And I wanted to...
That tree that was next to the well, was that an original tree they planted for, like, avenue or something?
No, there was no avenue there. Now I got to figure out how to get this to run. I wish I knew her name. The records are silent, mute when it comes to a young little 4-year-old child. She lays right here under this ground. Family, the Shower family, lived nearby here, and they went to church here at the Bethlehem Baptist Church. And it's interesting, and it should be striking to most, that on her tombstone of this 4-year-old little girl, almost 5 years old, just a couple weeks short of 5, there's a trillium flower engraved in the stone. She died in September of 1859, just before the trilliums come forth. Her spirit remains in this forest because people that live near and visit here will tell you that they've seen the spirit and the shadowy vision of a 4-year-old little girl walking here in the woods. The first time that little girl was seen was right at the end of the 19th century when they were moving the Bethlehem Baptist Church off of these grounds to a new site about 4 miles away. And one of the little boys who was helping them tear down the church and move the church out of this area insisted that he saw a little girl standing here. And so they searched the woods, and they searched the woods because they said she was crying. The little boy said he saw this little girl crying in the woods. And they searched the woods and couldn't find her. But there has been repeated sightings for the last 140 years. And so her spirit dominates this part of South Carolina. And I don't know why her spirit doesn't rest yet, but maybe it'll rest when her church, the Bethlehem Baptist Church, is moved back to this site. Captain Charles Johnson, 1724, wrote The History of the Pirates. Now, Blackbeard had been dead maybe less than 10 years by then, but he wrote about all these pirates. You see them listed there. The earliest rendering of Blackbeard the pirate, this is what Charles Johnson drew this image in 1724 of Blackbeard. This is what he said he looked like. Who was Blackbeard? How old was he when he died? How long was he a pirate? Well, it got into the movies and the television and the stories and the novels and all. He had a real exciting genre. And so that, and then Hollywood got a hold of it, and then they got some girls in there that are in trouble, and the men are going to save them. And These are the images, the horrible images. And the one over here with the heart and the arrow is the image of no mercy. See, they'll stab you 3 times and then they'll stab you really, really good at the end. That's what these images are supposed to mean. But I went down and listened to this guy give a rendering on his book, Kevin Duffus, The Last Days of Blackbeard the Pirate, down to Charleston at the Exchange Building. And afterwards, I went over and bought his book and then sat down and just asked him some questions about his book. And afterwards, after I left, I looked up there and he wrote in there, for Michael, Mayor of Blackbeard's birthplace, Goose Creek, South Carolina, November 8th, 2011. As I was walking away, I saw this. I went back and he said, well, I think he was born in Carolina, Mike, probably in the Goose Creek area. And then he told me something that just about fell out of the chair. He said his last name was Beard. Blackbeard is what we called him. That was not his nickname. His name was Beard. There was Black Bart, there was Black Sam, and he was Blackbeard. And he said that he doesn't know anything about the beards in this area. Well, I did. I just about fell out of the chair, and I didn't break the speed limit driving home that night, but I could not wait to get home to get into all my records on the Beard family, where they were, who they were, and that's where the story started coming together. The Chicken Trilogy, the chickens and the Beards lived at the same time and haunted the same land together. The hunt for Blackbeard in Goose Creek was on. The name is Beard, not Teach. And I started going through all my South Carolina archives and Historical Society records, and I found a whole lot of information in the American legal records published from 1671 to 1779 because his father was sued. And so there was a lot of negotiation about how big the land was, where was the land, how many cattle they had, how many slaves he had. All of that was all in those court records. And I just had a huge amount of information. So who was Blackbeard and why was he evil? Was it genetics? Was it environment? Was it a horrific event in his life? Or was it all of the above? And we know that Blackbeard was from the Barbados and the Caribbean Sea. So we know he had a pretty crummy environment. His daddy did. Pretty crummy environment growing up because we heard all these nasty things about Barbados. It's horrifying. It's most horrific. The richest and most horrifying society in the English-speaking world was where the Beard family came from, and they immigrated up here to Carolina and then came up to Goose Creek. The Goose Creek men used murder, slavery, bribery, and terror to create a sinful environment where evil thrived so mightily that Commissary Gideon Johnson lamented, "The Goose Creek men are the vilest race of men upon the earth. They are the most factious and seditious people in the whole world." The next guy, he was a author that wrote Colonial South Carolina. He wrote, "The men from Goose Creek were primarily interested in dominating the affairs of South Carolina so they could build fortunes in any way possible." And Francis Lejeune, who's my hero, he said one caused a poor Indian woman, a slave of his, to be scalped. There the poor woman lived 2 or 3 days in a miserable condition until she died alone in the woods. There's a lot of nasty, nasty stuff happening in Barbados that was transferred by the Goose Creek men up here to Goose Creek. And he said, "I must observe while the judge was examining evidences relating to the accused witch, she had many friends up here." This is what Francis Lejeune said. "It is a dismal sight to perceive how powerful the spirit of the devil." So Francis Lejeune witnessed Goose Creek men driving slaves chained in long lines passing his parsonage on the way to be exported to the Sugar Islands. And colonial Governor Joseph West said, "One of our servants brought out of England is worth 2 of ye Barbadians, for they are so much addicted to rum, they will do little without the bottle at their nose." So James Beard Sr., father is Edward, a.k.a. Blackbeard, was one of those Goose Creek men from Barbados. He was one of the Goose Creek men. That's how the name Beard really resonated with me, because I knew who the Goose Creek men were. And the Beards came home to Goose Creek. They immigrated up here. James Beard Sr. with his wife Rebecca, daughter Susanna, and sons James Jr., Matthew, and Edward settled on a large tract of land in the St. James Goose Creek Parish above the headwaters of Black River near the end of the 17th century, about 1690. And their land touched what is Foxbank today on the west. Anybody live in Foxbank? Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, you lived right next to Blackbeard. And the water highways are how people traveled, and even though they were at the headwaters of Back River, they still could float on shallow and flat-bottom canoes. They could float their stuff down to the river. And that's where Blackbeard's father kept his own sloop called the James. Kept it at Back River. The Beard family settled on the headwaters of Back River, north and west of Thorogood and south of Kinlow. 1,000 acres contiguous on the northwest of Thorogood. Thorogood is where Century Aluminum is today. Okay, kind of gives you an idea. Beard settled his family with 10 African and 2 Native American slaves in the parish. Captain James Beard Sr. sailed a sloop named the James, on which he transported items as far south as Barbados, his familial home. Now this is I shouldn't have even have this in there, but this is a plat, and the plat just haunts me all the time, because I think that Blackbeard property was right here. It says, land of Thorogood Plantation, land unknown. This is Thorogood in here. I think his plantation was somewhere up in this area. But I cannot find the plat that fits in with that. I probably shouldn't have even had it on here tonight. I didn't tell you anything. But I'm going to keep digging until I find out exactly where their farm was. And a friend of mine who volunteer works with me at the chapel site told me again that today's Thursday, it was yesterday at the chapel site, he said he and his brother would make swords in the barn, and then make swords and then go out in the woods and fight with them. And their grandfather would always holler and said, boys, you better be careful because Blackbeard will get you. I said, what do you mean he's talking about Blackbeard? Nobody knew Blackbeard lived around here. He said, I don't know, but Grandpa always said Blackbeard was in the woods. So there's a little hint of oral history being passed down for 300 years. And he's on that piece of property where the Beard family lived. Canoes and flat-bottom boats floated plantation products to the ships waiting in Back River. There was Chapel Creek, Foster Creek, Durham Creek, Medway Creek, Chicken Creek, and Back River flowed into the Cooper River. And the Cooper River could float some very large boats, some single mast, double mast, and triple mast. James Beard Sr. was a Goose Creek man and a freebooter. And raise your hand if you know what a freebooter is. I didn't know what it was either. I had to go Google it. And it means pirate. It's an archaic word for the word pirate. So James Beard, Blackbeard's father, was a pirate. And this is in the records. James Beard was a Goose Creek man and a freebooter. James Beard sailed with Governor James Moore Sr. to push that's the guy that owned this land, James Beard. There's a close relationship. And he patted his pockets grandly by freebooting during the expedition. Afterwards, he used privateering commissions to prey upon the Spanish fleet and emerged as an influential personality to whom the governor awarded land grants in both Carolinas. So James Beard the Sr., working with James Moore that lived here, got to be very powerful. And a good excuse was, yeah, we did run down that ship and kill the people and steal all their stuff, but they were Spanish. And they were Catholics. And so it was excusable. And that's how you could be a freebooter. Governor James Moore awarded to James Beard an exceedingly large land grant on deep tidal water in North Carolina. The generous grant to Captain Beard was in appreciation for the service in defense of the colony. The Moore family relocated from Goose Creek to North Carolina, aside other Goose Creek families, including the Howells from Howe Hall, the Davies from Liberty Hall, the Gibbs from Crowfield, and the Beards. They ended up going to that part of North Carolina, the Outer Bank. Isn't that cool? Patriarch James Beard Sr. relocated to North Carolina but died in Goose Creek in 1711 and left his Back River plantation to his oldest son, James Beard Jr. But James Beard Jr. died of Barker's fight. That's the quotation off the records. James Beard Jr., the oldest son of the Beard family, died of Barker's fight. Thomas Barker lived right here with his wife at Button Hall Plantation. He was the militia captain. He called the militia together at the 18 Mile House Tavern. It took 2 days to get all the riders to come together with their weapons, and then he took off up towards Monk's Corner, and then from Monk's Corner he followed the Santee River. And interestingly, at the 18 Mile House, Watery Jack was with them. He was going to be their interpreter and be their lead man. But as they took off, Watery Jack rode ahead, and they lost touch with him. However, the Indians ambushed James Beard Jr. at this place. And do I have it on a map? Yeah, there it is. James Beard died in an ambush in 1715. See the marks, that notation on the map. And it's hard to discern all this stuff, but this is Wassamasaw. This is Wassamasaw Swamp. Wassamasaw Swamp, the Wassamasaw Chapel. It's right here. And this is the road. The Monk's Corner is the road to Cypress Gardens. This is the road that goes on up to Monk's Corner. Then they ended up here and they got ambushed right there, and about 22 of his men got killed. And when they came back, they joined the people at Chicken's Fort waiting. But somebody said they saw Watery Jack at the ambush site. There had been a hurricane a couple years before, and the trees were all down and broken up and piled up and all that, and the Indians hid there waiting for him. How do they know where to go to wait? I think Watery Jack went ahead and told them they were coming. And why did they wait there? Because James Moore from here and his son were coming from the Wassamasaw, coming across, so that the two militia bands would come together and attack the Indians. Watery Jack, I'm sorry about the JAC there, but methinks Watery Jack is the author of most of ye mischief. That's what the governor said. Let me run you down with this guy, Watery Jack, and then we're going to come back with Blackbeard. Watery Jack was, according to James Moore, was plucked off the battlefield when he was still a boy. Plucked him off. I guess he just grabbed him up, put him on his horse, and brought him here, and disciplined him here until he was an obedient servant. His job was to run or walk with his master who rode the horse. He would run along or walk and be there when the master stopped and got off the horse, and then he would take the rein and go graze the horse, give him some water, take care of the horse, rub him down, put some bear grease on him if there's a spot here and there, and then have him ready for the master to get back on. But he was very good at doing that and ended up getting his own horse after several years. When he was a young man, James Moore awarded him a horse. And with the horse, he began to follow his master into the battlefield against other Indian tribes. And he was a fearless warrior. And not only was he a fearless warrior, but he saved his master's life by charging straight in the middle of a maelstrom of Indians to save his master that was being overrun. And because of that, his master emancipated Watery Jack and gave him his freedom and gave him the title of Jack. He was Watery Indian. There's a tribe called the Watery tribe. Jack is your military rank for an Indian. They're not going to call him Sarge. They're not going to call him Captain or Major, even though he might be in charge of 50 men. Maybe a Sarge would only be in charge of about a dozen men. But they were not going to have no white guy call an Indian by some rank. So they gave him an Indian rank, and Jack meant like sergeant, or you were in charge of the Indians in your group. The whites are there, and where you're alive with the Indians, you're in charge with the Indians. That's why they called him Watery Jack. And he became a skilled businessman working with James Moore. And I haven't got this from anybody, and I don't know if this is true, but I suspect that if he's not the wealthiest, if he wasn't the wealthiest Native American during that time in South Carolina, I don't know who was. He got a cut of the deer skin. He got a cut of the slaves that were sold, the Indian slaves that were sold to Barbados and the other sugar islands. He got a cut of that sale money, kept coming in. He was a very rich man, a wealthy servant, and an honest partner until he turned. After James Moore died, his master died, he never did establish a relationship with James Moore Jr. Why did he turn against the colonists? Why did he turn? I don't know. Maybe one day we'll find a little piece of information to help us understand that. Those are the Goose Creek men coming back with their Indians, and there's Watery Jack right there on the side. He ambushed William Dry. He was seen, according to the testimony in the court, he was seen, he was ambushed Richard Hearn. Oh, I forgot to tell you, his master, James Moore, gave him 10,000 sterling to go with two white guys up to Virginia and buy horses and come back. When they were in North Carolina, they got ambushed by Indians. One guy was bludgeoned to death right there. The other guy ran off. Watery Jack got shot through his thigh and ended up just stumbling into the woods and hid until the Indians left. The white guy got his way all the way back here and told them what happened. And they said there's no way they could, that battle's already been fought. But they went back to the ambush site and they found money scattered in the woods. So the Indians weren't looking for money. Maybe they didn't even know what it was worth. They didn't find Watery Jack. Where is he? They did find the body of one of the men, and they put stones on him. They said they sunk him in the river. I guess you don't bury him, but you'll sink him in the river. And then they came back. Oh, they had a horse was still there. This was a couple months later. What's the horse going to do? He's going to graze and walk around and drink, and he's going to just enjoy horse life. But during all that time, Watery Jack is finding his way farther and farther north. And soon after he got into Virginia, he was accepted and brought into the home of a frontier family who nourished him and took care of him for several months until he was up and able to walk again. And Watery Jack then came all the way back here to find his master and found his master on the Santee River and rejoined. Now, was that a loyal servant or what? A loyal servant. But then he turned. After his master died, he turned and he started ambushing. He ambushed Richard Hearn. Hearn was the guy that was at the camp with him when he got shot. He was the guy that escaped. Later on, Watery Jack was said to be seen there among the Indians that ambushed Hearn at his home near the Santee River. And then Roger Schinken was raising cattle on the Santee River. And when they got enough cattle, then they would drive them down to the marketplace through here. And they attacked him. There was nothing there except Schinken had a guy by the name, I forget his name. I'm so sorry, I forgot his name. But he was in charge, and he had about a dozen cowmen working there with him. And they were all overrun by the Indians, and every one of them was killed except one black boy who jumped in the Santee River and crossed the Santee River because he was raised here in Goose Creek over at Otranto, and he was raised up in the river and knew how to swim. And knowing how to swim was not common back then. There probably wasn't any Indians in Carolina that knew how to swim, and white guys neither. But that boy did, and he was able to run ahead and come down through Monk's Corner and warn everybody that the Indians were on the way. Before Edward became a pirate, he was a privateer in Queen Anne's War, which lasted from 1702 to 1713. Both sides brutally raided one another for booty, and it is likely that during this conflict, Edward became fascinated with the idea of seizing goods to amass his own personal fortune. Edward Beard, the third son, adopted the nom de gras, Blackbeard the pirate. Much like fellow pirates, Black Sam Bellamy and Black Bart, Edward Tatch or Teach was his chosen alias. He was afraid that now that he was an outlaw, if they could prove in court that he was an outlaw and he was the guy that was stealing this money from these ships, that they might take his father's land. His father was died by 1711, but they would take the land from the family, the land here in Goose Creek. So he had this alias. He's Blackbeard, but he would go by the other name to make sure. And he paid the taxes on the land up until the year he died. And after that, nobody was paying those taxes anymore. So there's another little hint that Blackbeard was the Goose Creek guy. George Chicken, Blackbeard intimately knew Charleston and especially the back river waters above Goose Creek, where he traded with George Chicken Sr. in Charleston Harbor and along the Cooper and back rivers before evolving circumstances forced Chicken to shun such lucrative associations in pursuit of justice for the offended seafarers. So Chicken ended up hanging he was on the governor's staff, and he ended up hanging a lot of these pirates. He used to do business with the pirates, and then he turned and he started hanging them. Captain Benjamin Hornigold began his pirate career in 1713 attacking merchant ships in Bahamas, and he joined up with Blackbeard and with Stede Bonnet, and then he retired. Hornigold retired from piracy towards the end of 1717, taking 2 vessels with him and leaving Beard in charge of the rest. From North Carolina, Edward Beard sailed the coast of Carolina and the Caribbean Sea, commanding as many as 6 ships and hundreds of men. In 1717 and 1718, he robbed dozens of ocean transports and earned a reputation for unbridled ferocity. He amplified his image by strapping pistols and cutlasses and leaving fuses in his beard and weaving fuses into his beard that he set ablaze before mounting ships. During the same frightful era, Stede Bonnet inherited his father's estate in Barbados, but instead he was a wealthy man, and when he got to be about midlife, maybe it was a midlife crisis, or I don't know what it was, but he ended up becoming a pirate and joining in with the other guys. Blackbeard the pirate and Stede Bonnet, the so-called gentleman pirate, terrorized Charleston Harbor, sometimes paralyzing the city for days and weeks as the colonists appealed to the distant proprietors for help. Beard captured a French merchant vessel named La Corde and renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge. He armed it with 40 guns and blockaded Charleston Harbor. Stede Bonnet resided on Blackbeard's ship as a guest until Colonel William Rhett arrested him and some of his former crewmen and shipped them to Charleston to stand trial. There, George Chicken served as one of the 3 judicial officers who sentenced Bonnet to death. They captured Beard in North Carolina on the 22nd of November, 1718, following a ferocious battle. John Maynard surprised the pirates, sent 5 rounds into him, and stabbed him no less than 20 times. They do have an historic marker in North Carolina. We should have an historic marker here in Goose Creek. Goose Creek home, born and reared here in Goose Creek, South Carolina. We're going to work on that. The victors chopped off Blackbeard's head and hung it from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship. They threw the pirate's decapitated body overboard. This is his cannon off his ship, and this was brought up maybe 10 years ago. Beard was a shrewd and calculating leader who spurned the use of force to rely upon his fearsome image to elicit the responses he desired. Beard was 28 years old when he died. Isn't that shocking? And he was a pirate for 22 months. But his personality and then the marketing and all the hoopla made it a whole lot bigger. I'm going to have to call it quits, and that's a good way to do it right there. Thank you, folks.